So, we're all gonna die. Okay, now that I have you guys' attention, let me take a step back. Okay. Um, we're in a really interesting place right now. I'm actually gonna talk to you guys about the American dream and the potential for a global nightmare and what we can do to prevent it. So we're gonna discuss the American dream in the context of existential risk. So I'm very much the product of the American dream. In many ways, I'm the epitome of it. I don't know how many places around the world currently or throughout human history, a kid who grew up in a refugee camp could start working at NASA at 16, build a bunch of companies, have a $100 million company, build a VC fund, and speak on stage alongside the nephew of former President JFK, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., luminaries like Brittany Kaiser, Amelia, and others. And I'm just very honored that that's the case. And I think it's a reflection of who we are, the fabric of the United States, our capitalist system, and our freedom to pursue happiness in however we find it. And I think that speaks volumes not only about our society and the structures that we have, I think it also speaks volumes about my mother and my father. Look, my father was born into a nomadic culture, literally living at the outsides of society, got a university education, was the first person in his tribe to do so, came back, built his life up, became a university professor, a scholar, a leader, and he fought against the Ayatollah. He spoke out against things that he believed they were doing wrong, and ultimately he got canceled for that. His accounts were frozen, he was thrown in jail for a year, he was tortured, and ultimately we fled the country to flee execution because they wanted to execute our entire family. So imagine then a man who built himself from nothing, was a scholar and a leader, coming to the United States and cleaning toilets at McDonald's on the third shift to start everything again from scratch and working his way up throughout that time period to eventually retire as a university professor in a strange land. My mom retired as an educator as well. And that's the beauty of what we have here in the United States. That's the beauty of our ability to say what we want and pursue our view of excellence, whatever it may be, whether it's starting companies, working in politics, being educators, doing what we want. And so it's really interesting to me, the slippery slope of what we consider words that you cannot say, the slippery slope of who gets to determine merit, who gets to determine who gets canceled in any given moment. And so to quote the patron saint of technologists everywhere, Elon Musk, we must cancel culture, right? So now, my view on this is that there are a lot of ways that we can address a lot of the challenges that we face. And I want to talk to you guys a little bit about that. Because we have some very big challenges that we face as a human race. And I think education and the free flow of ideas is a much better way to address them. So let me go back to the main idea of the talk that I want to talk to you guys about today, which is that we're all going to die. Okay, let me take a step back again. There's a 1 in 6 chance that we're all going to die by 2050. At least that's according to Stanford lab for existential risk. Now, back in the 90s, I read a lot of books by Stephen Hawking, who's someone I looked up to quite a bit. And he used to write quite often about the 17 ways that we as a human race can go extinct within the next 100 years. And he believed that if we don't become a multiplanetary species, by the time that indeed we would go extinct. So there's 2 categories. On the one hand, we have things that we cannot control. So things like an asteroid strike, a super volcano exploding, an alien invasion, things like that. On the opposite side, we have things that we do control. Things like catastrophic climate change, biodiversity loss, ocean acidification, endocrine disorders that cause the human race to go infertile because of certain chemicals that we put into our bodies. AI singularity, AI weapon systems, AI disinformation campaigns, and I could keep going. Now, according to the Stanford lab on existential risk, they brought together a bunch of scholars, a bunch of faculty and PhD students and so forth. One of the leader of the Stanford lab on existential risk actually came to one of my events and spoke to a private series of events that I host for executives and billionaires and investors and celebrities and so forth. And he walked us through their methodology, their process for coming up with that statistic, the 1 in 6 chance. And that's the ultimate number that they came to. Now, 1 in 6, look, I'm not an economist, but that seems like a pretty high number to me. Because if I was to ask you, if you had a 1 in 6 chance to die on the drive home tonight, would you be happy about that? If you thought that, he said he'd walk. If I told you that you had a 1 in 6 chance to die on the flight back home wherever you came from, would you accept that and fly? If you had a 1 in 6 chance of dying from poison from the next restaurant you go to, would you go to that restaurant? And yet, some of the smartest people we have in the world are telling us there's a 1 in 6 chance, that's a dice roll, that we all go extinct by 2050. So what are we going to do about that? So I'm going to share with you guys what I'm doing about it. If you got, there's 5 companies or 4 companies in a nonprofit that I run to specifically address existential risk, because selfishly, I don't want to die. I think the world is an amazing place. I like living, and also I don't want to live in a dystopian hellscape either. So can you guys all agree with that as well? Okay. So I'm going to share the things that I'm doing. If any of them seem interesting to you and you want to participate in the journey, definitely let me know or come up to me afterwards. But I also would want to motivate you guys to come up with other ways that you can invest your time and your resources to continue this amazing experiment in human evolution. Because if you think about the age of the Earth, which is 4 point something billion years old, we as a species, we're about 500,000 years old. We've only been writing history for about 4,000 to 5,000 years old. We've been civilized for much shorter. We're basically like pre-teens or like teenagers. We're extremely young. And so we're in that like phase where we're like riding motorcycles and making terrible decisions. And so we want to get past that, right? And become, an adult civilization that can, join the global, I guess the universal, whatever, if we ever meet aliens. So what am I doing to address these? So 4 companies and a nonprofit. The first company is Ahura AI, which is the company that helped co-host this. So what we focus on is education. Here's the challenge. Are you guys all familiar with this thing that happened with COVID? Did that have a pretty massive impact on the world? There's an entire generation of kids that lost a couple of years of school and they're way behind. We're in the middle of the 4th Industrial Revolution, which isn't like a futuristic thing. Andrew Yang and I always joked about this, that people call us futurists. And it's like, we're not futurists, we're presentists. This is happening right now. Right? Walmart and Target are replacing millions of warehouse workers with automation and AI. Drivers, whether they're truck drivers and Uber drivers, are being replaced by self-driving cars. A lot of retail employees, fast food workers are losing their jobs. We're talking about 60% of the jobs globally are being replaced currently with AI and automation. And of course, with the Great Resignation and all of these other trends that are happening simultaneously, where we are now is a point where there's a massive supply-demand misalignment between the skill sets that people need in order to be able to participate in the global economy versus the skill sets that people actually have. And so what we focus on is solving that problem. Look, if I were to ask you, what % of the global population has a college degree? Shoot out some numbers, just yell them out. Okay, I heard 30, I heard 45. What are some other numbers? I heard 12% from up there, 20%, 5%. You're actually the closest. So the number is 6.6%. 6.6% of the global population has a college degree. Now, we can have a conversation about whether that's the right KPI to use. I would probably agree that it's not. There's probably better metrics to use to identify the level of education people have. But let's use that for the time being, okay? What happens when we 10x that number? What happens when we 10x the number of scientists and engineers and entrepreneurs and politicians and doctors and medical professionals and entrepreneurs and crypto experts and computer programmers and everything in between? I suspect that we can solve all of these massive issues that we face as a human race, whether they're the SDGs or the global grand challenges or the drivers of existential risk. I believe that we can solve them by unlocking the intellectual capital of the human race. And so that's what we're working on at Uhura. So historically, we've had a system of education that was designed around the Prussian form of education that was designed to train factory workers. And so if you think back to elementary and middle school, I know it was quite a few years ago for people like me, but if you could think back to it, they prioritized teaching kids to follow directions, when the bell rang to show up on time, when the bell rang to go to lunch, right? To do whatever the teacher tells them to do, and be cogs in the machine. Why? Because we needed to train a significant number of people during that particular industrial revolution to go to factories and work and be consistent, do the same thing over and over again, show up on time and leave on time. Because guess what? In a factory, if you have a handful of people show up late, that entire line can't operate. So for the time, it was the right way to train people. Now, do you guys think that that kind of training is effective now in our current economy? Obviously, no, right? We have different needs. We need to train people to be able to work collaboratively with each other, to be creative, to come up with new solutions to challenges that we have. So that's number one. There's a way of training people that's designed around teacher-driven content. And then there's self-directed learning, which a lot of people tried with MOOCs, massive online open courseware, and things like that. What we've created at Her AI is something called AI-directed learning. If you think back to when Google was founded, their goal was to organize the world's information. What we're doing is personalizing the world's educational content, because it turns out that people learn differently. So there's about 20% of the population that learns really well when a teacher stands up and just reads material to you. The rest of the folks don't actually learn that way. Now, whether someone has ADD like I do, or if they have a number of other learning disabilities, or they just learn differently, right? Richard Branson, who's a friend of mine, famously has dyslexia. And so they thought he was really dumb in grade school. It turns out he's a genius. But he wasn't trained in a way that was able to unlock his potential from a young age, so he had to find other routes. And so there was a study that was done in 1982 where they took a cohort of people, they controlled for all the variables, everything from socioeconomic background and IQ and a number of other things. And so they took the first group and they taught them in the standard model with a teacher standing in front of 30 people. And then they took the other group, the test group, and they trained those people one-on-one. And then they tested everybody at the end of a semester. So they took the control group and they split everybody into quintiles when they took the tests. So you had the top 20% and so forth, like we typically do in our actual education system. It turned out when they took that second group that learned one-on-one individually from a teacher, 90% of those students scored in the top 20% when compared against the other group. I'm going to say that again. In the test group, 90% of those students scored in the top 20th percentile when compared against the control group. I don't know what that tells you, but it tells me that it's not that a bunch of people are failing. It's that 70%, that delta, the education system is failing them. It's failing to convey the information in a way that they can understand it. So what happens if we use technology to identify the optimal way to deliver content to an individual in real time? Well, it turns out that when we ran a test at Harvard Extension School, the people were able to learn 3 to 5 times faster than students that were learning through traditional methodologies. Now, just take a step back for a second and think about the implications of that. If you're a kid and going through K through 12 and undergrad, and if you're able to learn 3 to 5 times faster, you're able to learn everything up until the end of undergrad by the time you finish 5th grade. If you think about all the people losing their jobs and need to be retrained in the tech sector, which is where most of the new jobs are coming, You guys all have like parents or uncles that are like, oh, I'm just not a computer person, right? They like you come over to teach them how to like use a PDF, right? That's a lot of people. And we don't have the luxury anymore for people to say, I'm just not a computer person. Everything requires a certain facility with technological tools that we use in our everyday lives. And the people that don't fall behind. And so that's what we're focused on. So what we do is we work with large corporations like the Walmarts and the Amazons of the world. We enable them to use our technology to upskill and train their teams and their employees much faster. So instead of firing them and hiring new people, they take existing employees and retrain them for high-tech work. And then for every license that we sell to corporates, we give away a free license to members of underserved communities globally, especially with a gender and diversity lens. So we partnered with a bunch of refugee camps, with countries in sub-Saharan Africa, with nonprofits in India and other places to put this technology in the hands of the people that need it most. Actually, just recently, a very dear friend of mine, one of my best friends, Paula Schwartz, right before Putin invaded Ukraine, she created a nonprofit to provide housing, healthy food, healthcare, and so forth. And she tapped Ahura to support all of these refugees that were fleeing war-torn Ukraine, to provide them the resources to be able to live. And then, of course, now we are providing our technology to them so that they can learn new skills and then get jobs working remotely at Western corporations so that they can then begin working again and getting money so that they can live their lives, right? And it turns out that in places like sub-Saharan Africa, if you just, and in Southeast Asia and other places, if you just give a bunch of money to the men, it turns out they spend it on alcohol, drugs, and hookers. It's kind of terrible. But if you give the money to women, and if you train the women to be able to generate money themselves on a regular basis, you create a paradigm because they reinvest those resources into those communities to lift up the entire communities from the ground up. So that's part of the reason we focus on diverse backgrounds, especially with a gender lens in these communities. Now, another element of that is the Web3 component. So we've partnered with an organization called Rainfall, where for all of the folks around the world who leverage our technology, we create a crypto wallet for them. And then we give them an opportunity to sell their data if they want to, because we collect a significant amount of data on every individual to understand the optimal way to deliver content to them. So we're building the biggest consent-based set of biometric data that's attached to how people consume content that exists in the world. And it's all consent-based and ethical. And we'll talk about the ethics in a moment and when I talk about one of my nonprofits. And so then we believe, as Brittany Kaiser works on with the with Own Your Data Foundation, and she does some amazing work, so you should definitely watch what she does. We believe that people should have agency over their own data. So when we enable them to sell their data, it's an opt-in mechanism. So the natural default is that they don't sell any of their data. They have to go in and specifically say, here are the categories of data that I want to sell, and these are the categories of organizations that I want to sell them to. But instead of just selling them to advertisers like Facebook, because that generates about $7 a month, they also are able to sell them to researchers, actuaries, insurance companies, medical device companies, pharmaceuticals, governments, AI companies, technology companies, and so forth, if they choose to do so. So we're able to generate $200 a month of what we call a universal earned income rather than a universal basic income. We give 70% of that back to the user. So 15% goes to our partners at Rainfall. We keep 15% to run the servers, but 70% goes back to the user. That's $140 a month. Now, for a lot of us here in this room here at South by Southwest, that's not a whole lot of money. That's a bottle of scotch. But for someone in Ghana making $5 a month, that's life-changing money that they can then use to reinvest in their communities. They can use to make sure that they have shelter, food, medicine, and so forth, so that they can actually focus on the things that they want to learn and are able to eat and take care of their families while they're developing the skill sets necessary to take that next step and work in the tech sector. So that's the first one. If you want to be involved, definitely let me know. We're doing a lot of partnerships with NGOs and others. We're bringing on new customers, new clients, and we're also taking on additional investments as well. So happy to chat with you guys about that. So the second organization I'm going to talk to you guys today is AB Plus Ventures. It's a $20 million venture capital firm that I run with my friend Anitha Vadavatha. She was selected by the United Nations and the Frontier Foundation as one of the top 10 women in tech back in 2018. And we deploy resources into transformational artificial intelligence, Web3, and space tech that has the potential to impact over 1 billion people. So that's our thesis. So we definitely need deal flows. If anybody knows really good companies, happy to get introduced. Also, we're taking on LPs as well, so happy to chat with you about that. But our focus is on gritty founders who have a track record of successfully operationalizing solutions and who are able to go through all the ups and downs of building companies. And let me actually back up with her, just FYI, my COO and co-founder is here in the audience as well, Alex Sato, who is an amazing individual. He was born in Nigeria, came to the United States to go to an Ivy League university, got his MBA at Kellogg, worked at Goldman Sachs on the AI team. He worked at NVIDIA and was responsible for deploying over $10 billion worth of AI GPUs. I actually met him when we were both on a stage for the United Nations, and that took me a year to recruit him to join the company. He's an absolute powerhouse. He also has a nonprofit where he advises half a dozen heads of state in Africa on AI policy, which is absolutely amazing. My other co-founder and CTO, Dekai Wu. Any of you guys ever use Google Translate? Okay, so he created Google Translate, and he's absolutely brilliant. When I told Richard Branson that he joined the team, Richard was like, how the hell did you get Dekai out of retirement? That's amazing. So he's considered widely as one of the top 10 AI people in the world. Anyway, so that's the second project, AB Plus Ventures. The third project is a nonprofit called Digital Guardians. And Richard Branson very generously co-hosted our inaugural event and helped me found this organization. It came about from a conversation that I was having with him in the hot tub on Necker way back in April of last year, where we were talking about the elders and the amazing work that he did with the elders. You guys all remember what the elders is? Okay, so for anybody that doesn't, back in 2003, he brought together the late Nelson Mandela, the late Archbishop Desmond Tutu, the late former Secretary General of the United Nations Kofi Annan, former President Jimmy Carter, former Prime Minister of Ireland Mary Robinson, and a bunch of other luminaries to work together to first try to prevent the Iraq War. And they unfortunately failed at that. They had been in conversations with Saddam Hussein, and Saddam Hussein agreed after Richard flew in and had a bunch of meetings with them to abdicate. And he said, look, if you can bring together luminaries and we do a press conference and you can guarantee my safety and the safety of my family, if you can guarantee that the West won't bomb my people into smithereens, I will happily abdicate. I will go off and live in exile and, we can figure things out. And so 18 hours before they were set to have a massive press conference with all these people I just mentioned, Nelson Mandela and Archbishop Desmond Tutu and Kofi Annan and others, unfortunately, Donald Rumsfeld and Cheney and our government decided to start bombing the heck out of Iraq. So for various reasons, they didn't want him to abdicate. And so he realized, though, that there's power in bringing these people to save people's lives. And so they would fly into humanitarian crisis zones to prevent genocides, to end the use of child soldiers, to end rape as a weapon of war. And they were quite effective. They saved millions of people's lives. And so when we were chatting, I said, there are a new set of challenges that exist, and the elders are continuing to do great work. And I said, what would it look like if we created an intellectual successor to the elders that works on the existential risk that arises from artificial intelligence? Because as Elon said, artificial intelligence is 100 times more dangerous than nuclear weapons. And yet we have entire global efforts to prevent the misuse of nuclear weapons. We have treaties, arms control treaties. We work together with the United Nations. We have all sorts of things that prevent their use, prevent the misuse, prevent them from getting in the wrong hands. But we have 3 minutes left? Okay. But we don't really have anything for the AI community. And so I thought, what would happen if we bring together the top AI experts from around the world and bring together and share our resources and our reputations to apply pressure to bad actors that would misuse AI in such a way that could potentially end the human race or create a dystopian hellscape. And so, thank you. So that's a nonprofit. If you want to support that, definitely reach out to me. I'm happy to have a conversation. The last two I'll share really quickly. I have an organization called Oasis. It's a private community of 4 cohorts of people that come together on a regular basis. Investors, impact investors, whether they're VCs, angels, billionaires, or family offices that deploy capital to solve existential risk issues. Impact-driven founders and CEOs that have a proven track record of successfully operationalizing solutions to the world's biggest problems. The third group are global experts that have graced some of the world's biggest stages. And the fourth group are celebrities that want to use their influence for good in the world. And we get together in private events at different people's mansions in non-solicitation environments governed by Chatham House rules. So rather than people running around and pitching each other and giving each other cards, we ask each other what we're passionate about. We develop relationships first, and then figure out how we can leverage our shared passions and resources to solve some of the biggest problems that we face. So over the past year alone, there's been over $200 million worth of transactions from people partnering together, investing in each other's organizations, working together to solve very big issues that we face. And finally, the fifth one, Neural Tunes. It's a company, it's one of my portfolio companies. I was the first investor, chairman of the board. They leverage the AI that we built at Ahura, but instead of for education, they use it to address mental health issues. So PTSD, depression, anxiety, things like that. They use music as medicine. It's built off of 17 years of research that was done at the NIH that shows that you can use music to solve these issues without SSRIs and pharmaceuticals. We're drugging so much of our population on a regular basis. And to me, that's crazy when we could use something like music to solve these problems. And so with Neural Tunes, for every license that they sell to corporations, they give away free licenses to first responders and veterans and so forth as well. So whether you want to join us and work with any of my projects, or whether you want to start something yourself, or there's a whole bunch of other amazing projects that you can be a part of, though your data foundations is absolutely amazing. This organization, United We Stand, is amazing from a political context. I highly recommend that you use your life force, your time that we have here on Earth, to address these challenges that we face. Because look, if 2050 is the year, the 1 in 6 chance, it's not like it's going to be 2049 and suddenly a light switch will be flipped and it's like, oh no, it's over. Really, we have 10 or 15 years to get ahead of these trends and these changes that are happening in society to address these issues. And we need everybody. Because guys, the cavalry isn't coming. This isn't Lord of the Rings. We can't wait for Gandalf to walk in with Gimli and a couple other guys. Harry Potter isn't coming to save us. We are the cavalry. We are the heroes of this story, and we need everyone. So please, in whatever capacity you can, let's drive this Web3 revolution. Let's drive the impact and any projects that are going to save the human race. Thank you so much, guys.